Good morning or almost afternoon, everyone. I'm in Pacific time, so it's a little earlier for me. I am so delighted to be here virtually with you this morning. And as Madeline previewed, what I'm going to be doing over the next little bit is sharing with you about the two program components of relational outreach and phone banking that I and my organization Unify and our director of engagement, Pedro Silva, are going to be supporting. But before we jump into that, is it possible with our sort of hybrid technological situation to hear from a couple folks about why they were excited about being part of this program? I'd love to hear from a couple of people that are present there, maybe two or three people, if that's technologically possible.
Raise your hands. We have two roaming microphones. Sam has one and Ben has the other.
We have microphones, we don't have hands.
So I'd love to just hear from a couple folks about what inspired you to be here today on a Saturday and be part of this program, and also where you live, and maybe whether you're brand new to involvement or you've been involved for a while.
Okay, do you want to know my favorite food too?
Yes.
My name's Kate Hancock Cook. I'm a chapter leader in Appleton Fox Cities chapter. And I came here today, even though I'm supposed to be knocking doors because I'm running for county board supervisor and I need to knock another 150 doors this weekend. I came here because I love being around people who are as excited and hopeful about getting something done as I am. And it feeds my excitement. And also because of what Madeline said, I'm not doing this by myself. We're not doing it alone. And I really, really appreciate that. Is there anything else? Favorite food?
Yes.
Probably tea and crumpets, I think, is favorite.
Awesome. Cheers. I've got my tea right here. Awesome. Do we have one or two more folks who would love to share?
Yeah. Is this on then? It's not. Okay, put it up to your mouth then.
Okay, how about that? Oh, you
Yeah.
ready? Okay. Phil Smith from Waukesha, and I am here specifically. Well, I'm not going to be able to join the breakout, but the Courageous Conversations I am very excited about because I read this book that Madeline turned us on to, How Minds Change, and went to Madison to hear the author speak. And anyway, it affected me a lot. It was like, this is so cool, learning how to genuinely get through to other people, especially when they are have very different opinions than yourself. So I'm excited about that. It has so many applications well beyond what we're going to be doing here, but just cool stuff. And thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. And what's your favorite food? We need to know that before you pass the mic.
Pizza.
Awesome. All right. Do we have one more?
When did y'all get so shy?
Hi, I'm Brian Coker. I've been with CCL for a while as legislative contact I've done some legislative meetings before. Kind of stepped away for a while. I've been heads down running a biodiesel plant, but glad to be back. This is the first time back in a while. Unfortunately, I'm partially back because my plant is closing because of federal policy. So I'm here to get back in it because I care a lot about it and I want to make sure that we're making the difference we need to make.
Awesome. Great to hear from you all and great to hear these different locations in Wisconsin to which I've been. I'll say more about that in a minute. But the hope, hearing that having hope and working together, that we're not alone, that we care about having some behavioral science based ways to really move the dial. Hearing that we want to actually utilize our most precious resource, our time, to make a difference whatever you thought of when I asked the question, even if you didn't raise your hand, and these other pieces, each of which resonate deeply with me, are the things that are going to sustain us in this work. So I really appreciate everybody sharing, and I'm super delighted to be here with you this morning. I'm going to start sharing out my screen. Can you see this slide okay that says voter engagement for impact?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So, sorry, we're having a fun technological day together. My computer just went a little bit mad, but here we go. This is the slide that we're meant to be on. So the goals for this session are pretty straightforward. We want to make sure that you understand the phone banking and relational outreach elements of the program and the unique role that all of you can play in 2024. And just to share with you a little bit about myself and my organization, Unify, which will be supporting you with these elements. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our big picture vision is a world in which all individuals and communities are flourishing, and we have ecosystemic flourishing. So individual, community, people, planet. Our mission underneath that vision is to reduce cultural divisions of all kinds, so reduce political polarization and all kinds of cultural divisions in order to accelerate progress on key challenges of our time. So those challenges, of course, include climate change, sustainability, and regenerative systems, which, as you all know, is intimately woven with human flourishing. There are 5 elements to our work, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to hone in on the one that is most relevant to what we're here to do together today and over the coming weeks and months. And that is that we help build capacity for other organizations. So you can see the little salt shaker in the corner of my slide, and that is there because we sort of consider ourselves like the seasoning or the sauce. I love food metaphors, as you will learn. I also mix metaphors wildly. We consider ourselves sort of the special salt or seasoning to add to what is already the great work that you are doing and the great work that other organizations are doing. So the specific seasoning that we'll be bringing to this program is our expertise in deep relational organizing mixed with evidence-based practices. So all of our work is deeply rooted in relational community organizing practice, as well as behavioral and brain science. And so we're going to utilize that sort of special mix in order to help really amp up and make sure that your program is the most effective use of your time possible to move the dial. And I really love that Madeline framed the program as building the power of climate voters. For myself, just to share a little bit about who I am and how I'm coming to this work. I actually grew up in a teeny tiny little town that most people have never heard of in southeastern Massachusetts. And I grew up in a single parent home with my mom. And one of my earliest memories is that I had figured out how to place myself near a window in our bathroom in such a way when I was like a little kid, like 3, 4 years old, in such a way that in the summertime I could put my ear up against the window and listen to adult conversations that perhaps I was not meant to hear. And and on one such day that I was doing this, my grandmother had come over, and she and my mother were talking about the possibility that we might lose our home because my mother couldn't afford to pay the property taxes. And of course, I didn't know anything about taxes at that age, but I got enough out of the conversation that I scuttled off my little stool where I had my ear up against the window and ran and got my piggy bank to try and solve the problem. The reason that I'm sharing that story and what that has to do with what we do in Unify and what we're here together to do today is that what stuck with me about that moment was not the facts of the case. It wasn't if we had a home, if we didn't have a home, where would I get my breakfast in the morning, or where would I have my bath or be read a story to go to bed at night? Rather, it was the fear and powerlessness that I heard in my mother's voice. And that sort of sound was dissonant with what I was told and taught by her about the American dream, that if you work hard and play by the rules, anything is possible. And so I have spent my life, honestly, since then, trying to make what I would have thought of as the American dream when I was young and what I would now think of as human flourishing accessible to all people. And I see community organizing, having conversations with voters that are relational and evidence-based as one of the most powerful tools that we have in order to make sure that less people, fewer people, have that feeling of powerlessness where they can't control the policies that affect their daily lives. Um, so in service of that mission, I got involved with community organizing over 20 years ago. And I have worked for 501c3 nonprofits, played leadership roles in presidential campaigns, in national nonprofits, in super PACs focused on climate change, and of course now with Unify. And my fun Wisconsin connection is that in 2008, and why I have such a fond place in my heart for the state of Wisconsin, is that in 2008, I ran Get Out the Vote for President Obama in Wisconsin and traveled to all the places that you named and many more, from east to west, north to south, every corner of Wisconsin, training people on Get Out the Vote and seeing the beautiful state and meeting the beautiful people of Wisconsin. So I have a very near and dear spot in my heart for Wisconsin. Now I do not do partisan politics anymore. I'm working on bringing people together across the political spectrum and people who are politically homeless, and that's what we do with Unify. So in the course of this journey, I've been lucky to work with academics conducting over 24 randomized controlled trials, some of them that were first of their kind and groundbreaking, in order to figure out how can we best change voter behavior in order to make sure that all people have the power to affect the policies that impact their daily lives. And with that, I'm going to jump into, whoops, I'm so sorry. My slides are being really temperamental today. I'm going to jump into the content of the session. So as I sort of previewed and Madeline previewed, the key program components that we are going to be supporting are relational conversations and phone conversations. And the relational conversations, what we mean by that is looking into your personal networks and figuring out who can you have a conversation with a very specific format that is behavioral science based, and I'll say more about that in a bit. The term BRAVE that I have in all caps there is an acronym that we use for the style of courageous conversations that we are going to have with people who we are uniquely positioned to influence, the people who know us because they live in our communities, who love us because they're our family or friends. And we have a unique power to be able to engage those folks based on the relational fabric that we have with them. So that's part one. And part two are the phone conversations. And we're going to use what I'm terming a hybrid script for the phone conversations. I'll unpack in just a moment a little bit more about what we mean by that. Phone conversations are where we're going to call, which many of you, I'm sure, in the room have experience with. And if you don't have experience with it yet, It's going to be a lot of fun. And I know it can be a little bit scary, but I will bet the people who have experience with the phone conversations in the room can share with you some great experiences that they have had in those interactions. Super powerful way to engage voters and impact voter behavior. And we have some really intentional targeting that we're going to be using for exactly who we talk to so that you all will make a very special and unique contribution in 2024. Okay, so who are we talking to with our courageous conversations and our phone conversations? As I mentioned, with the courageous, brave conversations, we're going to be talking to folks in our personal network. And we're actually going to teach you all an exercise, not today, but as the program unfolds in the next coming weeks, that is called personal network mapping. That is going to help you sort of make visible and systematic the depth and breadth of your own network. And that may seem like, oh, I know who I know, right? Like, why would I have to do an exercise about that? But actually, we have relational fabric with a lot more people than we realize many times. We encounter a lot more people in the course of our day than we might immediately think of when we think of who is our personal network. And we're going to get really intentional and systematic about how we map that out and engage those people. For the phone conversations, as I mentioned, we have a very intentionally targeted group of people that we are going to engage. And these are folks who have low voter turnout scores and high climate scores. Now, what the heck does that mean? There are probably some of you in the room that are already familiar with these terms, but for anybody who isn't, we're going to be working with the voter file. So essentially the database of all people that are registered to vote in order to identify those people who have been modeled to be less likely to turn out to vote. So the way that that works is that using all of the different types of data that are part of the voter file, which includes consumer data as well as vote history and other demographics. Academics are able to create models that applies a probability score from 0 to 100 to each voter on the voter file. And that is the probability of how likely are they to turn out to vote. And so with the version of the voter file that we'll be working with, we're able to look at those folks who are less likely to turn out to vote. And same thing with the climate scores. Each voter has a sort of support score for climate between 0 and 100 about where are they in terms of climate support. And so one of the things that happens, particularly during a presidential election year, is that most campaigns target people with turnout scores, likelihood to turn out to vote, sort of in the middle. And then whatever else they put into that mix depends on what their purpose is, right? If they're working for a candidate, it might be a candidate support score. If they're just trying to do sort of nonprofit, nonpartisan turnout, then it may be something else, or it may just be the turnout score. So that is going to become relevant in a minute when I talk more about the special role that you all have to play. But for now, the takeaway from this slide is that in our relational conversations, it's people that we know where we're able to have a more long form conversation. And in our phone conversations, it's this specially targeted group with low turnout scores and high climate scores. Whoop. And again, there we go. My computer's being a little cranky. Okay, so how we're going to communicate with these folks. The brave conversations are a 5-step process that anybody can learn. So each letter in BRAVE stands for a step of the process for our courageous conversations. And we'll train folks who are interested in this pathway on that 5-step process, which again is easy to use. Anyone can do it. And we'll get to practice it and workshop it with each other before we go out into the wild and use it with people who we know and encounter in our day-to-day lives. And then we'll also have a process where we get to come back and debrief and do some coaching about what was that like. Doing the BRAVE conversations is a practice. It's like playing the piano or learning tennis or yoga. You can be great at it right out of the gate. And it's a practice that we keep sort of doing coaching on and refining over time. So I've been doing these kinds of conversations for over 20 years, and I still practice and debrief them and learn new things from them. So it's a really dynamic, fun process, and it's super impactful because it's based in behavioral science and has been tested to move the dial with folks and help change minds and behavior. In our phone conversations, we're going to be using what I have termed as a hybrid script. So hybrid between what? What do I mean by that? Many of you may be familiar with a get out the vote script that has a few key elements to it. Maybe it has what folks call social pressure, which is saying, that many people are voting or your neighbors are voting. Maybe it says, we hope to be able to thank you in the next election for voting. That's a pretty common feature of get out the vote scripts these days. Maybe it has some planning questions of how, where are you going to vote? How are you going to get there? So those are some traditional elements that are sort of a one-way communication to a person that we'll call that sort of a more traditional best practices get out the vote script. Some of you may be familiar with a practice called deep canvassing. That is a practice where it's more of a back and forth conversation. It's a longer conversation, and we're using a psychological lever that helps people talk out loud through their own cognitive dissonance. We're going to use a little bit of a hybrid between the two. So we're taking a key principle from Deep Canvas, why people think Deep Canvas works, which is called active processing. And we're using that in our phone conversations to amp up the effectiveness, along with some of the other best practices that I've mentioned, which have been tested to move the dial to change voter behavior. So what active processing means is expending mental calories. It's helping people almost persuade themselves because they're thinking out loud through their motivations and what they're going to do next, as opposed to being told. A lot of times when we just tell people to do a thing, we're not as effective as we can be. And sometimes we even can create what social psychologists call backlash effect. So backlash effect is when you are sharing with somebody something that you want them to change their opinion on or change their behavior about, and without meaning to, the implication is that their existing behavior or their existing opinion is wrong or stupid or both. And nobody likes to feel that they are wrong or stupid or both. So they may start to dig their heels into their pre-existing belief, not based on the pre-existing behavior, not based on the content of the conversation, but based on the fact that they've now gone into a protective mode about whether their pre-existing behavior or thought was right or wrong. So we avoid backlash effect by engaging active processing and helping people think things through out loud. So it's an interactive conversation, but it's a shorter form conversation that has been proven to be very effective for mobilizing voters. We have tested a version of the script we're going to use for these conversations with a randomized controlled trial that demonstrated that it had a 10% bump with the least likely voters to get out and vote, a 5% bump with a traditional get out the vote universe or group of voters, and a 13% bump with Hispanic voters. So that hybrid script is going to help us be both efficient and effective, and it's something that people can learn very quickly. It's very easy to use and fun to use. Oop. Okay, so digging more deeply into the special contribution of this group, we talked about the turnout scores a few minutes ago. And what we are going to do is actually dig in a little bit lower in those turnout scores than most individuals and organizations do when they're making, when they're creating a list of voters or a universe of people to contact for get out the vote. So that means that these voters might be a little less likely to vote and that we can have a special impact on them because they also care very much about climate change. And we're going to be able to integrate that care and concern that they have for climate change into our script. And as I mentioned, our script also has been proven to work really well with these lower turnout voters. Now, the reason other entities and organizations might not contact them is because when folks don't have much vote history at all, it's less likely that the contact will make a difference. But the way we're going to solve for that is by using this special script that has been shown to work with this group of voters, as well as integrating that climate change message that we know because of the targeting that they care about a lot. So this means amidst all this noise that's going to be happening in the 2024 election, we're going to be able to go in like a little laser and have a unique impact on this very special group of voters with our very special message. And I could not be more excited about that. So our Brave Conversations preview is a little bit of an experiment that I want to do with you all. I want to ask you to think about, do you have a friend or a family member that you've sent all of the articles, maybe about taking climate change action, maybe about voting, and like it just doesn't move the dial with them, or whom you just avoid talking with about voting and or climate issues? Like you don't start the conversation because it's uncomfortable. So I just want you to like take a minute and think, is there somebody in my life that fits one of these profiles that I've like sent all this information, but they're not like changing their mind or behavior, or you just don't even want to start the conversation with? And just by a show of hands, I'd love to see like if there's somebody that comes to mind for you. If you raise your hand, if you have somebody in your life like this. Cool. I see a few folks with hands. So let's think about that second person, that person that you might avoid talking with about voting or climate issues. And think about reaching out to that person about the election and the conversation that you want to have about what's at stake relative to climate. What are some of the places that the conversation might get difficult? What is the seed? Is there a moment when you sort of get a feeling or a thought that, ooh, I want to avoid this, or this is going to be hard? So just want you to think about that for a moment. Whoops. Okay. And then the third thing I would love for you to think about is something that you know about that person that that doesn't match, the fact that they're difficult to talk about these things, that doesn't match the fact that their behavior or their opinion is sort of different than what you are working for. Maybe it's a time when they've been kind. Maybe it's a value that they might share with you. Maybe you see them in other parts of their life express a value around safety and security for people or opportunity. So thinking about that for a minute. And I would love to hear if we can go back into the group with the microphones. I would love to hear from one or two people about what came up for you when thinking about these three things. Like, who is this person? What is the feeling that happens in your body when you think about having that conversation? And what is the thing that you know about them that is opposite to how that conversation goes or how you think it might go? I would love to hear from one or two people for whom like somebody came into their mind and they could share their thoughts on those three questions.
Am I on? Okay, so I have, I'm in Rotary and there's a gentleman in there that I have sent some emails to say, hey, let's get together and have lunch. I wanted to talk to him about sort of the, he's a businessman. I wanted to talk to him about how the Better Business Bureau have endorsed citizens climate lobby work and so forth. And I got a big no from him. And it really hurt. It's like, no, I don't want to meet with you. And it's somebody that I see pretty regularly. So I'm listening to you talk, and I do think about how I need to talk to him because he's a very influential person, and I'd like to talk to him. And then I found out that he invited a bunch of people to do yoga. And it's like, yoga, this guy does yoga, really? And I thought, well, and I don't do yoga, but why don't I just talk to him sometime about yoga? So I just to break the ice. The other thing is, I knew that he was a very kind person because he's been very helpful to a lot of other people in the world in Rotary. So thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there one more person who would like to share?
Okay. So I was thinking about my dad, and so for a number of years, we haven't talked about anything climate related, because it used to get very heated and was very intense. And he is like what you would consider like a climate denier. And so in thinking through this exercise, I don't engage with him on those types of conversations anymore. However, he lives out in the country. He loves his land. He plants like hundreds of trees per year. And we can engage on like framing it as like conservation issues much more easily and basically not using the word climate. But that's a tough relationship for me.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you both for sharing. Yeah, so it turns out, right, that humans are really messy. We can hold opposing thoughts and values in our minds. Like I would love to, be like a muscular Southern California person where I live, running down the street and like donuts are delicious, right? So we can hold opposing thoughts in our minds. And a lot of times we don't know that we're doing that, right? And when we approach people that we know or that we love right out of the gate with our opinions, it can often create that backlash effect that I was mentioning earlier. So our BRAVE methodology is going to help you help others close that disconnect between the values and the behavior or the opinion. It's going to give you a really practical way to also get yourself out of that fight or flight mode that you might get in when you're thinking about the difficult conversation, right? Or when you're going to start it, like, you know, when our shoulders come up and become earrings and we start to breathe a little bit heavy and so forth. And we want to, you know, it's like fight, flight, or freeze, right? That's what our parasympathetic nervous system is doing. So this tool is going to help you get out of that and get into really productive conversations that feel good for both you and the person that you're speaking with and that can have a really big impact. So we'll do a whole workshop on that. And yes, as I mentioned, humans are messy and they have lizard brains. So we are going to address throughout both the phone banking script and the Brave Conversations, both how we communicate, what is the manner in which we're communicating, and what we communicate, so that when we are communicating new information, we are inviting active processing and not creating a backlash effect. Our script for the hybrid canvassing, as I mentioned, is going to include several elements that have been proven to work. So it's going to include identity framing. That's when we say things like, I'm out, you know, here today, or I'm on the phone with you today, calling people like you who care about their communities. So we're framing civic engagement as a way of caring about communities or caring about the climate, right? We can insert different phrases that might be uniquely applicable where I said caring about the community. And so that's one best practice. We also are going to include that active processing bit that I talked about, where we engage in a little bit of a back and forth so that people can think through the new information. And we're going to include education. It turns out that one of the biggest barriers for low turnout voters to voting is that they don't think they know enough. And so we're going to help them out with that by giving them some information and places to go to get more. And we are going to use that fun social pressure tool in the toolkit as well, that helps people, you know, sort of helps activate that sort of keep up with the Joneses, that everybody's voting, voting's public record. We want to be able to thank you for voting, your neighbors are voting, etc. So social pressure has a few different flavors, and we'll integrate one that works really well for this script. And there'll be a few additional elements as well. But these are some of the bones that the make a plan piece, that's been shown to increase voter turnout as well. We'll include that. And it will still be a relatively quick script to get through so that we'll be able to really talk to a lot of people and make a big difference. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we have, I'll double confirm this with Madeline, but I think we have a few minutes for questions. Yeah.
Yes, we have 10 minutes.
Yes, we have 10 minutes, she says.
Great. Does anybody have any questions?
Over there. I just have a question about calling people, and especially with identification of spam, you know, risks on phones. I hear a lot of people talking about, I made, you know, 50 phone calls today, and no one asks them, well, how many people did you really talk to?
Yeah.
And my concern, you know, with phone banking is just not being able to reach people to have the conversation. And, you know, how do you deal with that? I ran for state senate, so I knocked on a lot of doors and called a lot of people. And, you know, like, so I'm trying to learn how to effectively contact people in today's world. I mean, and that's the thing. So that's my question.
That's a great question. So we are going to be using what is called an auto dialer. And that means that, like, as you are on the phone, there's sort of an automatic dialing, and you're not going to be like punching in each individual number. Like, the mechanism works so that you hear a little sound and then you just start a conversation with somebody who's already picked up the phone, and you'll get training on that. So don't worry. I know it sounds a little strange, but it's an easy system to use. You'll totally get trained on it. And that means that you're just having conversations throughout the time that you're on the phone with people. And so you're getting with the phone banking, we're honing in on that group of people. And believe it or not, there still is a group of people that will pick up the phone. And I still do these calls myself, and it's great fun. Like to be able to talk to somebody, engage them. Most people, when you sort of get over the hump of like, a stranger is calling me, are so delighted to have a genuine conversation about the elections, and we'll be able to teach you a bunch of best practices for building rapport on the phone right off the bat so that people stay in the conversation with you. It's also why we're doing this two-pronged, and actually more than two-pronged, but what we're supporting is the two prongs. You have even more with the whole program. But within this little bit, we're doing the two prongs of both working through the relationships to get some of those people that you have unique access to, as well as doing the cold calling. So they're complementary in order that we can sort of create a whole that's really effective. Great question. Thank you for asking that. Are there other questions?
Yeah, yes, hi. My question concerns the probabilistic model you mentioned that was used in identifying candidates for us to contact. Could you share, please, what criteria were used in determining what folks were leaning toward, having a positive perspective on environment?
Yeah, great question. And there are all sorts of different models on the voter file that have like an enormous number of criteria in them. I would not be able to list them all off for you, but essentially, the way the models work is it's a regression analysis, which means looking at somebody who has been demonstrated to be a climate voter. Often that's identified with a survey to see like what is a group of voters that care about climate change. And then essentially what a regression analysis does is it takes a whole bunch of different data points about that person. What magazines do they subscribe to? Where do they live? What is, all of these different things that we have that either are part of the voter file or have been appended to the voter file through consumer data. And it creates a model of what are the characteristics through more than, oftentimes it's more than 500 different data points. What are the characteristics of the model climate voter? And then the regression analysis creates a probability score that says like how much like that voter are other voters. So I'm sorry, I don't have a like full list of the criteria, but that's basically how it works. And it's usually a very large number of data points that go into that. Other questions?
One here.
Okay, my question is kind of a follow-up to the other questions you want to ask and your answers. When the phones, people don't pick up because they don't know what's on there. Is there a name that's applied to, we're environmental question asking or something that encourages them to pick up the phone? And the second thing is if they don't pick it up, do we leave a message?
Great question. I generally do not encourage leaving messages. We can make a decision about that as a group. You'll be getting a customized script that is specifically for you. So it may be the case that we don't leave messages for a little while and then we do towards the very end, or it may be the case that we never do. The reason that I generally don't advise leaving messages is because we don't know 100% that the message is getting to the voter. That's one reason. Number two is we don't know well, sorry, I'll start that sentence differently. Number two is that that's a one-way communication, which we know is less effective than a communication that involves active processing. So for that reason, it's not the best use of our time. And the third reason is we're using time, leaving those messages that we could be using talking to live voters. So I generally encourage, in terms of using time most efficiently and effectively, not to use that time on messages, but to use it on talking to live voters. However, there are sometimes important reasons why we might do that, why we might leave messages closer to election day. And I think we will, sort of working with Madeline and the leadership of the group will make a determination about if and when it's strategic to leave messages. But that's sort of like the underlying thinking so that you understand that. And a reason that we might leave them towards the end is maybe we think a bunch of these voters don't know where their polling place is, and we want to make sure to leave them a message that says where their polling place is, for example, or maybe a polling place has moved. That would be a really good reason. And a lot of people don't know where it is, something like that, where there's a very specific reason that we want to leave that message. But otherwise, there's so many voters out there to talk to. We want to use that time in the most effective two-way conversation. And I think we have time for one more.
What does the phone say? Yeah, what does the phone say?
The other question was, what does the phone say when they get a call?
What do they
The
see
caller
on their
ID.
phone?
I
Yeah.
think they just see a number, but I think Madeline would know that better than I do, honestly.
I don't know it yet, but we will know it eventually.
Yeah, I think they'll just see a number, but we'll let you know once we do know, once the system is engaged. Awesome. That was a little short question, so I think we have time for one more still if there's another one.
Will we collect one? Will we collect data in the phone conference?
The question is, will we be collecting data during that conversation?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we always want to record data in our phone calls. And we'll have a very simple coding system for you to use to code the results of the call. And that will help us know who has been contacted. It will help us clean the lists, right? So one of the great parts of this program that I love and is so brilliant on the part of Madeline and whomever else was part of coming up with this is that it's focused both on the primary and on the general, which is fantastic for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that in that primary period and all the way up to, sort of that final vote period, we're able to be cleaning our lists and understanding more about the data, so that our data, when we get to the very end, is very clean and useful. So if you get people who, oh, that one doesn't live here anymore or wrong number, that's actually a great outcome of a call because we're cleaning those out of the list so they won't be in there at the very end, when we're really trying to get a lot of calls done quite quickly. So great question. Always recording data. Data is our friend. And is a way of respecting our time and the time of the other phone bankers, recording good data. Awesome. Well, I think my time has expired, so I just want to thank you so much for having me here today, virtually, for being here on a Saturday, for how much you care about your communities and about the climate, and everything that you're going to be doing between now and Election Day to make a big difference. And I'm so excited to be working with you over these coming weeks and months. So again, thank you so much. I hope that you will give yourselves all a big round of applause for being here and for being awesome. And Madeline, I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I think that was incredibly helpful for all of us, and I hope everybody's as excited about going forward as I am.